Hello, it's good to
How
see
are
you.
you?
Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. How was your day today?
So far, it's been wonderful and hilarious. I had a dietitian for the first time. For the first time, a dietitian messaged me in private on Instagram
Oh,
to take me to task over a graphic I posted that Dr. Trajan put out a couple of days ago that I shared
which
about
one?
the 8 ways, 8 lies
Oh
dietitians
yeah,
told
I
me.
reshared that too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, they came after me. They didn't come after you. It was
What
hilarious.
what
And
was the yeah.
I came at me and said, "This is misinformation. You're going to suffer terribly in a short time for eating the way you do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And I laughed. I said, "Listen, I'm not changing what I do one iota. The further away I get from dietitian
From the likes of
standard of
you.
care, the healthier and happier I become."
Wow. Yeah, yeah, it's a problem. It runs deep. They really believe it, and that's how they can get out of bed every day and go to work, because otherwise I don't think they could. Yeah, it's gonna take a long, long time, but I'm glad you were able to cure your depression. I, you know, I'm not gonna go into I think people already know everything that carnivore has done for me, but today is about you, and I'm so excited to have you here. By the way, I'm recording. Do you want to just keep going, or do you want to like?
We can keep going. We can go as long as you need to go.
Perfect. Yeah, because I think that was a good little story there to keep it for everybody. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to my interview today. Actually, it's my second interview because we did an IG live. I'm going to post it on my YouTube channel first. I'll try to do it today and then give it a few days and then post this YouTube. So yeah, we did an IG live just a few days ago. And today is the second time. So I am so excited to continue our chat. But before we start, Brett, can you tell everybody a little bit about your story? Because it's truly exceptional, inspiring, and it's going to help so many people.
I certainly can. And thank you, Sarah, for this chance to speak with you and to share my experience. I grew up in a standard American diet type home. My parents had an enormous vegetable garden, so I had fresh vegetables year round. There was always a ton of meat. There was never a meal that meat wasn't a part of it, unless it was breakfast, and then oatmeal and cereal would jump in. But a lot of the years when I was very young, my mom fixed mostly bacon and eggs. It wasn't until we got school age that she stopped doing that. Um, and out of the four of us, there was me, my mom, sister, and dad. My dad passed away in April of 2020 from complications with type 2 diabetes that he had suffered from for over 20 years. Kidney failure eventually took him out. My sister, my younger sister, continues to suffer from IBS, I can't say it today. Ulcerative colitis almost killed her at one point, but she's not interested in this way of eating because she's done research. Uh,
But
like,
she still has ulcerative
yeah, she
colitis.
still has it. She still has it, and she still, you know, she can't she can't just leave her home in the mornings to go to work without having to make a bathroom visit first because of it.
That's so strange. I don't,
It's
yeah.
very bizarre to me. Anyway, and my mom had a lot of smaller, less life-threatening things happen, but her health has been sideways for most of the time I've been aware of the carnivore way of eating, etc. She's doing better now because I highly recommended that if she wanted to keep being ambulatory, she needed to give at least severely cut back, if not give up on sugar completely. But and then out of the four of us, there's mom, dad, my sister, and then I suffered from chronic mental illness starting around age 15 for 43 years of my life. Severe depression, anxiety, and insomnia. Thankfully, in 2018, I learned about the carnivore way of eating, and I eliminated all of that out of my life. That's the short version. If you want more details, I'm happy to give them.
Yes.
I was mentally ill, like I said, starting from the age of 15. That's when, looking back with clear eyes, I could see that that's when the sleep disruption started and things started going sideways for me. And the era that I grew up in, there was no psychologist at our schools. There was nobody observing me with the expertise to recognize mental illness at all. And as long as I wasn't engaged in disruptive behavior, you know, I could have had schizophrenia and nobody would have known. So I got no treatment. And I actually I had a promising career in psychology at one point in time. In my early 20s, I landed a job as a counselor at a private profit hospital in Johnson City, Tennessee. And I sabotaged it, which is not uncommon for people suffering from depression. Your decision-making skills don't improve the more depressed you become. And here I was, surrounded by some of the cream of the crop in psychology in the southeastern United States, and none of them recognized it.
Wow.
Which I find today even more shocking. So after I sabotaged that, career, I continued working in mental health related type fields. For instance, I ran a group home for mentally retarded adults who had that was during the years that the push to empty out institutions was in vogue. And so there was a lot of these group homes were rehabilitation oriented.
Okay.
Because you had people that had been institutionalized 30 and 40 years of their life total, and they had no rehabilitation skills whatsoever. They didn't know how to dress themselves. They didn't know how to feed themselves, all sorts of things. Wow. Very, very, very severely retarded. A lot of nonverbal types and things like that. But I had to work like 85 hours a week at that. I finally, one day, the phone rang and I was so angry. I knew it was the group home. I drove the phone through a wall and I saw my guitar and my amplifier sitting there in the floor. And I'm like, at this point, screw it. I'm growing my hair long. I'm going to be a musician.
Love it.
And that I have stuck with, although the hair's come and gone mostly. I am growing it back because I'm contrary. But depression sabotaged every aspect of my life. I mean, I did the sabotaging, but I was unknowingly at the time motivated by my mental illness. I'm constantly, when I was sick, I was and a working musician. I write songs. I've released a few albums that had I not been crazy, they might have done a lot better, but I insisted on mixing and mastering them, and I didn't know what I was doing. And if you listen to them, you can tell at that time I really didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't process the information. I couldn't accurately perceive my environment. My wife would say, "It looks like it's going to be a beautiful day." Just like that. Positive, uplifting comment. But what I would hear, my illness would filter and twist that to where what I heard, clear as a bell, was, "Oh yeah, it looks like it's going to be another beautiful day. That's just great."
Right.
And because I love my wife, "Honey, what's wrong?" "Well, what do you mean what's wrong? I just told you it looks like it's going to be a beautiful day."
Yeah.
So my ability to perceive my environment accurately diminished greatly as time progressed. And my ability to interact with other people became much more problematic as well. And despite my skills as a guitar player, I eventually reached the point to where I would start getting calls from bands that sounded really great to me. I never thought there was a problem. And people would call and say, why don't you just stay home tonight? You're really hard to get along with.
Wow.
And I was oblivious to all of it.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
Fast forward to 2015, I weigh 289 pounds. I'm on 6 different psych meds. At this point, I saw many doctors, many psychologists, and they just basically started throwing things up against the wall to see what would stick.
The
And
usual.
yeah, the usual, right? And anyway, I had a friend of mine who I was still able to write and record music, and I had put in this ad in Craigslist looking for a vocalist because I'd written some blues music that I knew I couldn't sing. And this lady responded, an extremely talented woman who bears mentioning, even though we don't associate with each other anymore. Name's Kimmy Wade. And without her, you and I aren't having this conversation ever, because she's watching me fall apart right in front of her eyes. And one day she said, and I take my meds I took my meds as prescribed, because my mental health experience, I didn't want to be one of those chronics who kept coming back to the hospital twice a year, because they get to feeling better, they get out in the world, start enjoying their life, and psych meds are very expensive. And they stop taking their meds, and the next thing you know, they're right back, they're getting picked up at 3 a.m. for knocking on people's doors to preach and share what's got them on edge at the moment, and they go back to the hospital. I didn't want to be one of those people, so I took my meds as prescribed always. And all I did was get worse. And the psych meds made me more obese. But this friend of mine suggested to me in February of 2015, hey, have you thought about medical marijuana? And as a musician, it was always around me. But I had a bad experience with it when I was young, as a teenager. So I never fooled with it.
Yeah.
Beer was legal. What do I need that for?
Right.
But I did some research, and this was around the time that Oregon and Colorado and California were doing what they did, legalizing it, creating medical marijuana programs and things like that. And I saw some anecdotal evidence that people were experiencing some symptom relief. And my wife and I talked about it, and we're like, well, at this point, what do you have to lose? Because the last recommendation from a medical professional, a psychiatrist, who did some really bad things to me, which I'll get into, he recommended that I have electroshock therapy and or commit myself to a long-term hospitalization.
Wow.
And I had seen ECT patients like 20 minutes after they'd had the treatment, if you can call it treatment, and they looked like animated corpses. And I was like, oh, I don't want any part of that. Not to mention it costs like $50,000 just to get that done once. Wow. And I had a genuine fear that if I committed myself to a hospitalization, I might go in and never come out. This friend of mine recommended that I look into medical marijuana, and my wife and I are like, you've tried everything else, why not?
Right.
Worst that can happen is it won't work. So we secured 4 grams of flour, which is a tiny amount of cannabis. And my wife got a can of butter recipe off the internet. And she made these quarter-size keto cookies. They definitely weren't carnivore. And I was scared to death of them, Sarah, because of the bad experience I had when I was young. And I broke one in half and took it. And in like 10 minutes, I felt like a million suns had lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't high. I just didn't feel like crap for the first time in many, many years.
Wow.
And then the high kicked in about 45 minutes later.
Yeah.
And I realized, to my surprise, that cannabis treated my symptoms successfully. My mood improved dramatically. My anxiety vanished to almost nothing. And I could sleep at night. My wife came home that first day, and I met her at the door with a big smile on my face, and she didn't know what to think. Who is this person staring here looking at me with a smile on her? Because in the past, that was not a good sign. That meant I had some kind of crazy delusional scheme up my sleeve. And I'm like, this really works. I couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe it either. But you couldn't argue with the evidence right in front of both our faces. And then 10 days into that experience, I mean, because that became part of my daily regimen, 4:20, I'd have a cookie. And
you waited?
Well, yeah, I would. I would wait till then, because that just seemed like the appropriate time. It made certain that when she came home from work,
yeah,
I was in the best possible state I could be in, knowing what I knew then.
Yeah.
And because she suffered horribly. People don't realize mental illness doesn't just affect the sick person. It really torments the family members, because I was very hard to live with. I was angry all the time. I would get weepy, but I was usually enraged most of the time, every day. And it was very hard on her. And that's why I tell people, if anybody's earned their spot in heaven, in my mind, it's my wife, because she stuck with me through all of that. Anyway, so the cannabis is happening. 10 days into the experience, I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, Sarah, and I'll go to put my shoes on, and my belly gets in the way. And I'm like, that's not supposed to be happening. That's bad. That's really bad. Somebody's trying to call me. Okay, send a voicemail. Are you still there? Good. I didn't get disconnected. Anyway, I go and I start having a small panic attack because of this. I mean, cold sweat, the whole 9 yards, because my belly's in the way of me putting my shoes on. And I recognize clearly how bad that is. And then I saw myself in the mirror accurately for the first time, and God knows when. And I looked like somebody had made me up for The Walking Dead. I'm gray, very gray, kind of green around the edges. I not in good shape, not in a good place at all, health-wise. And I told my wife, I said, I need to start that Atkins diet, which, a quick aside, 5 or 6 years previous, I had gone on Atkins because I had gained so much weight from the meds I was taking.
Right.
And my mood improved, but at no time did my wife or I attribute that to the dietary change, and neither did my doctor.
Of course not. Yeah.
And after a year, I got to go to my 40-year high school 30-year high school reunion, had a good time. Even though you look at the pictures, you can see I'm still fat. But I started writing music again. I was performing in churches and speaking and doing these sorts of really positive things. But after 10 months of this, I was like, I really miss having ice cream. And I really miss having a slice of coconut cake or coconut cream pie whenever I want it. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to doing that. And if I gain all the weight back, that's no problem. I can just go back on Atkins. So I thought. Well, in July of that year, which I can't do the math in my head to tell you exactly what year that was. I think, 2010. 2010 is when it was. And I'm at Mass one evening. I'm a thankful Catholic convert. Mass is very, very special and important to me. And we're on our knees right before communion. And I get hit with this overwhelming thought. If you don't get out of here right now, something very bad is going to happen. And it was visceral. I could not ignore it. I literally jumped up and ran out of that church. And 15 minutes later, I'm curled up on my couch at home, bawling like a baby, and have no idea why.
Wow.
And that began the worst 5 years of my life. And it wasn't until the cannabis experiment that I got any relief whatsoever.
And throughout all of this time, you are on your meds.
Absolutely, 100% on my meds. They were, they were constantly being changed.
Right.
That Prozac was the one constant because apparently my body handled that fairly well. But, I was on Abilify, Lamictal, which is a seizure med, used off label for
Lithium.
I never took lithium. I told him I would never take lithium because I knew from when I worked in the field, and we would have people who needed lithium was the only thing that could stabilize them, and their quality of life was really crappy because of lithium. I didn't want anything to do with that. I turned that down once. I think one nurse practitioner asked me if I'd be willing to take it. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. That or Thorazine were definitely on the never ever to take list.
Okay.
Seroquel, Abilify. I could probably, if I thought about it really hard, it's written down somewhere. My wife kept all the receipts from the drugstore. And it's quite a thick folder. And the same thing would happen. I would feel different or slightly better for a short period of time, and then my mood would crater out of nowhere, usually for no discernible reason.
And so those 5 years, it all started by you stopping Atkins and going back and eating things, high carb, sugary foods.
Exactly.
And you kept eating those foods for the next 5 years, right? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. And I thought that granola was good for me.
Yeah.
I ate
thought so
tons
too.
of granola, and I know why now. Is because it was like candy. It's all it was sweet candy. It really had no nutritional value whatsoever beyond that. But I was a musician. I'm still a musician. I'm not trained in nutrition. I never gave a moment's thought that nutrition would have anything to do with my mental illness.
Right.
Because we were never, even when I worked in the field, it was never discussed. It wasn't something that was thought of. And yet here our cafeteria was feeding our patients suffering from horrible mental illness, feeding them inflammatory garbage cooked in seed oils.
Yeah.
Fast forward to May of 2018. This same friend who recommended, or acquaintance who recommended that I try cannabis, says, oh my gosh, you got to go watch every video made by this guy named Dr. Jordan Peterson. You're going to love it. And I did a search for him on YouTube, and I found the Jordan Peterson Destroys collection, which if you haven't seen, I highly recommend. He does an interview it's a famous interview with a British broadcaster lady.
Oh, I think, yeah.
And he renders her speechless with logic and common sense. She literally couldn't form words for like 15 seconds. And I still laugh myself into tears every time I see it. And then he looks at her and says very politely, gotcha.
Okay, that's a different one. I should watch that.
Oh,
I so many. I don't know.
It's Kathy Newman was the broadcast lady's name.
Okay.
If it's still up on YouTube, hadn't been jerked down, that's just the creme de la creme, in my opinion. But I became an instant fan. I mean, he talks about personal responsibility and committing yourself to honesty, or at least not lying. That really resonated with me, even in my mentally ill state. And then part of my 420 routine, then after I discovered Jordan Peterson, was to eat my cookie and watch Jordan Peterson videos. And I found this 30-minute cutout of him on Joe Rogan. I get emotional when I remember this, where he described in a simple way how his daughter Michaela had eliminated her arthritis that damn near killed her and her chronic depression symptoms by eating beef, salt, and water. Okay. And I'm like, now, if this is anybody but Jordan Peterson saying this, somebody who I know to a certainty has impeccable integrity, I laugh and change the channel because that's crazy. Just eating meat? Are you serious? Why hadn't somebody told me this was possible before?
Right.
And so when my wife came home, the first thing I did before she even got around to doing what her normal routine is, said, you have to watch this with me. I want to make sure I'm really hearing what he's saying. And after she watched that clip, she's like, yeah, he's really saying that. And so I started investigating. And the next video I found, I mean, God works miracles, and this isn't one of them because I got the information in just the right order. The next video I found was by none other than Dr. Sean Baker on Joe Rogan. And here again, you have this incredible integrity. This man at one time had the codes to launch nuclear weapons for our nation. He became a doctor and was sent to Afghanistan for trauma surgery. They just don't let anyone do that. You've got to be an extraordinarily well put together human being, intellectually and mood-wise, character-wise, to do that. So I kept on looking, and then I found the next discovery was the linchpin. It was a talk that Amber O'Hearn gave in 2017, where she described in the Amber O'Hearn way of speaking how we as a species literally came down out of the trees because we started eating meat and we grew these large energy demanding brains in our present skeletal structure. Although before agriculture, our skeletons were actually larger and our brains were 300 cc's larger too. Agriculture has not been good for humans, unfortunately. And I told my wife, I said, and my wife's watching all this with me. And she's a really good sounding board. And she was really great then. And I'm like, well, I have to do this. I can't not try this.
You owe it to yourself.
July 16th, 2018 was day one. 10 days into it, I woke up without joint pain for the first time as an adult. I'd never been diagnosed as arthritic. I had what's called, normal aches and pains of living 57 years. But as a musician, I was also one of those, I was a lead guitar player, and for entertainment value, that and the fact that I was nuts, I would be the guy who would climb up on tables and play solos. And sometimes those tables didn't cooperate. And I would fall, and I had to keep on playing, and I had to protect the instrument. And if I walked around like a question mark for the next 2 or 3 days, who cares? That's rock and roll. So I had aches and pains. So to wake up 10 days into eating meat and drinking water with no joint pain, I'm skipping down the sidewalk like a little boy, giggling to myself because it doesn't hurt. It feels good. Didn't expect that. I also lost all my sugar cravings on the 10th day, and they have never returned. And then on the 24th day, I'm taking my morning walk. It's like 6:30 in the morning, 6:30. It's dark out. And my biggest fear with starting this way of eating was that I would placebo myself into thinking I was better when I wasn't. But I'm walking along, I'm feeling pretty good, and positive about things, but it's like a switch is flipped. And all that rage, and all that anger and all that darkness and all that sadness that had dominated and controlled my life, it all just went away. It went away and it's never, ever come back. And it was replaced by a waterfall of joy that has not left me since. And that's why I do this, because going down memory lane sucks. It really does. But people need to know you're not broken. You're not a genetic error. You don't have a character defect. You, like me, were taught to eat things we should never, ever, ever have put into our mouth. Not the first time. And you suffered from it. But you don't have to suffer anymore. And that's why I do these talks and these interviews and why I promote this way of eating the way I do, because people don't have to suffer anymore. But the disease management system is structured so, and you got a compliant media that helps them along, because, hey, they get paid for this too, that represses these things and goes out of their way to belittle us and chastise us for so-called false information, misinformation, it's whatever label they're wanting to apply to it. And the reality does not change. Today is my 1504th day of only eating meat and drinking water. And I am living proof that this is valid. It's possible. And it's doable, because I'm no one special. I'm just flesh and bone like you are, like everyone else is. I just didn't want to be crazy anymore. And I will eat this way until either we run out of meat on planet Earth altogether, or until my heart finally runs out of beats. Because I value my sanity above all my earthly possessions, and I will not do anything to jeopardize that. There's no taste, no texture, no social setting worth me putting my sanity at risk. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Brett, for sharing that.
It's a privilege to do so.
I know how you feel when you go back into those memories, and you have to remember the darkness that you went through, and then even more so you get emotional when you actually get rid of that, because it's like, is this really happening? When you've lived all your life, you just think that there's no solution. You've seen every doctor, you've tried every drug, and you might have had some hope at the beginning of every new protocol, and then every single time that hope gets squashed, eventually you get to the thing that actually works, and you're still so scared that it wouldn't, or you really don't believe that it will eventually. Maybe it's just a placebo effect, and then when it actually works, it's it's literally a life-changing moment. So thank you so much for sharing that moment with us.
You're very welcome. It's an honor to be able to do that. And it's why I'm such an advocate, because this is easy.
Yeah.
This is liberating. People are like, oh, that's such a restrictive way of eating. And I'm just like, you know what's restrictive? Depression is restrictive. Anxiety is restrictive. Insomnia is restrictive. My wife had osteoarthritis in both her shoulders and in both her hands. She waited until after I finished my first 30 days on carnivore. I teased her about it in memory, but reminding her, I said, yeah, she was waiting to make sure I didn't die. If I lived after 30 days, she was going to give it a whirl. But she lost that agonizing arthritis in just a month of only eating meat and drinking water.
Wow.
And you can't argue those things out of existence. And people I've had, well, you lost a lot of weight, that's why you're feeling better. No, I lost 94 pounds low carb, and I was still a lunatic. Over the 3 years from 2015 till right up before I found out about carnivore, I started walking. And I got up to where at one point my highest mile total was like 41 miles in a week. And my knees were like, maybe you ought to dial that back because it's starting to get problematic. But I stuck to low carb, and I literally walked off 94 pounds. And then when I started carnivore, my exercise continued and I lost 22 more pounds.
Wow.
And since then, I went for a year and a half and didn't lose any more weight. I put on like 10 pounds of muscle, which pushed the scale back up. But eventually it's all settled back down to where I'm floating between 167 and 172 all day, every day.
Do you work out regularly nowadays?
I work out not as much as I did in the beginning because you got to understand, I was sedentary. I sat in a computer chair for 10 to 14 hours a day, trying to work on music and trying to write songs, etc. I was not physically active. I was so obese. Being out in the sunshine terrified me. I'm in the state of Florida where summer gets really hot. I was scared to death of it. And plus I had all these warnings on all this medication I was taking. Watch, don't risk sun exposure. Prolonged sun exposure.
Why?
Was the Prozac and the Seroquel.
Oh, I didn't.
They had labels. They had warning labels on them.
Huh.
About sun exposure.
I wonder why. Okay, it might be serotonin syndrome. Sun increases serotonin levels, and those SSRIs or a lot of antidepressants fall under the class of an SSRI, which is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, meaning it prevents the brain cells from reuptaking the serotonin they've released into this area in between the brain cells, which is really what you want to feel the serotonin's effect. So if you're taking those drugs and they're increasing overall serotonin activity in your brain, and then you're seeing the sun a lot, which also boosts serotonin, that could lead to a very dangerous, almost fatal condition called the serotonin syndrome. So I'm assuming that's probably what's going on here.
And I actually experienced some of that when my doctor originally just kept, when I would go see him and be reporting my decline, he would just up my Prozac. And when he got to 80 milligrams, then bad things started happening. Headaches, chronic headaches. But all those years I was on all those meds, and I had the brain zaps, the flashes of light. The worst thing that happened though with that is, I go back to the last psychiatrist I'll ever see, not named Georgia Eade or Dr. Chris Palmer. Those are the only two on the planet right now I would let work with me if I needed it. This guy took me off Prozac cold turkey to put me on Latuda. Didn't titrate me off the Prozac that I'd been taking for 23 years.
Ooh. What happened?
So I tell you what happened. Antidepressant withdrawal syndrome is what happened.
Ooh.
Imagine, if you will, what it would feel like if somebody took a warm washcloth and rubbed it directly onto your brain. Oh. That's the closest I can come to describing what I felt. And it was that way for weeks and weeks and weeks. And called him to say, is there anything you can give me? Because this is horrible. I mean, this is terrible. And all he could do was offer different benzodiazepines. And I'd already been on Ativan for 8 years for the anxiety. So there was no,
How much higher can you go? Yeah.
I didn't want to up that anymore because I knew instinctively, from my past experience in the field, that's extremely dangerous and addictive. But because of the cannabis, I was able to titrate safely off all those meds. Unlike a lot of people, I knew how to read the literature and how to do it safely. I had no problems coming up. At the end of 2015, I was off all the antidepressants and all the antipsychotic meds. At the end of 2016, I was off the Ativan. that was very hard to come off of. The day after I took my last eighth of a milligram dose, I woke up with vertigo for the first time as an adult. And I had it was like imagine, if you will, somebody slightly nudging you forward, pulling you backwards, and moving you slightly side to side without end.
Right.
That's what that was like. And I knew it was because of the benzo. I knew it was benzo withdrawal. I had that for 3 months. Smoked a lot of cannabis trying to get through that. And then I was on trazodone for 8.5 years for sleep. Trazodone's an SSRI that's used off label because it will put you to sleep. But I gained a ton of weight, and I woke up with a drug hangover every morning. I got off all that, was off all meds at the end of 2017, and I've not taken any pharmaceutical medication except for one run of antibiotics when I had an upper respiratory infection in the fall of 2019. I haven't had to see a physician since, except for an interview.
That's good. Yeah, that's a completely different context there. That's
definitely.
Wow, amazing. I'm so glad you were able to do that. So many people just can't get themselves off of these drugs that are highly addictive, and that the pharmaceutical companies are very, very careful about ever using that word, and they work with their reps very closely to make sure the word addiction doesn't ever come up, which is ironic given how much titration you have to do to really get somebody off of it safely. So I'm so happy that you were able to get yourself out of all of this. I did want to ask you earlier when you were talking about your experience, having a bad experience with cannabis. Can you share what was that experience like?
It wasn't anything especially awful. It was just I got lightheaded. I didn't know that anything about tolerance and dosage and things like that. It was just there was a joint going around, and I would hit it as it came by me, and I had too much. Right. I got too high. I got lightheaded. I got sick, and I passed out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I'm like, well, I can do that with beer if I wanted to. Right. A whole lot cheaper.
Right.
And not go to jail for it if I get caught with it in my home. Because it was illegal at the time.
Yeah, at least in Florida, it is mind-blowing that it is still illegal in Florida, given that alcohol is legal. Really, alcohol, with all of its side effects, with all of the deaths and the consequences that people could do while being inebriated, that's legal, but weed is not. Give me a break. So,
well, I got to give Florida credit. The voters decided that the voters wanted the medical marijuana program. And at one time, I had a card, but it was just too expensive. The way they set the system up to consume the amount of cannabis that I needed to consume on a monthly basis cost me $400 a month.
Okay,
and I couldn't afford that.
So the card is what is expensive, or the money
to buy the actual cannabis. The card's a $300 or $400 investment to get, and you have to go see a doctor 2 or 3 times a year.
That's so expensive.
And pay $150 a visit.
Yeah.
To sit there and talk to him for 10 minutes and tell him how good you're doing.
Right.
I couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
And I now only use cannabis to help with sleep at night.
Yeah.
I've begun as an experiment over a month ago. After doing some research, I started microdosing certain types of mushrooms.
Oh, I saw you posted about that.
And it's a much more therapeutic, effective medicine than cannabis. Nothing against cannabis. I'm not bad mouthing cannabis in any way, shape, or form, but the difference is profound.
Yeah.
And you can create your own a whole lot easier than you can grow your own cannabis.
Okay. So you're doing that for insomnia, or like just so that you can sleep better at night?
Somewhat, yes, but it also what I have a problem with even still, and people don't realize this. Just because you're well doesn't mean you're right. I had 40 years worth of survival skills and certain behaviors that I had to really focus hard. And I haven't gotten rid of all of them yet, even though it's been 4 years, still working on it. But I had a very inappropriate manner of speaking to people. My language was very dark and very vulgar, and I didn't care. And you just don't stop behaving that way. Cannabis made all of that melt away completely.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen it.
And the microdosing the mushrooms has proven to be even more effective.
Why do you think your manner of speaking was like that? How can you give us some examples? Because I feel like a lot of people might not even recognize that trait in themselves, you know?
Well, I couldn't carry on a conversation like this without swearing every other word in the most vulgar, horrible way possible.
And why do you think you did that? How did that make it easier?
That was just a habit. That was my response to being ill. I was always in a state of anger and frustration. And I was also very deluded. You know, Sarah, if I just had this coffee cup, it's really expensive and hard to get. But if my wife made sure I got this coffee cup, then everything in my life would be better. But after I would get the coffee cup at great aggravation and expense, I would have it for 10 minutes. And after I got done looking at it and used it, I would come to the conclusion that there was 50 things wrong with this. And it was just another example of why my life was a piece of shit. That's the nicest way I know to tell you that. And so all those awful habits don't just stop because you're not crazy anymore. You have to number one, make yourself aware of them. And I had this terrible, it's not so bad now, this terrible habit. There's somebody in the community who I have enormous respect for that I wrote a message to. I'd been carnivore 6 weeks, 2 months. And I didn't get the response back that I expected. I got this curt, kind of annoyed response. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I went back and read what I sent them. What I read was not what I was thinking as I was typing this out. I wrote something rude, presumptive, and inappropriate. Completely, that was never my intention. I wouldn't do that when I was crazy. Unless you pissed me off, unless I thought I had a reason to be angry with you, then candy bar the door, all barrels would be used. But that, I still have to like triple check everything I write. For all my face or Instagram posts and everything, I have to double check and make sure that something didn't slip in there that doesn't belong because of old habits. And it's hard to discern those things. It requires a level of honesty that most people aren't willing to exercise on themselves.
Right, because it's hard to look at your flaws, you know, or try to look for your flaws. We don't want to do that. It doesn't feel good to do that.
No, it sure doesn't. But you can't make people listen to you and respect what you have to say if you're talking like a raging idiot. And that's kind of what I was. And as time goes along, I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be on cannabis forever, and I've almost phased it completely out. In another 6 months, I won't be consuming cannabis at all, most likely.
Yeah. You know, my 2 cents on this topic, because I wouldn't say, I guess you could say that I've struggled with insomnia. And I never realized that it was that until I realized that my husband literally falls asleep in 5 minutes, like clockwork. I'm like, how? Sometimes I can be like a whole hour before I fall asleep. And then what I realized is that exercise, but I'm talking a lot all day long. I'm moving and I'm like lifting weights, I'm running 10 miles, and then I have a desk bike. I move it when I do podcasts, but it's usually here. So every time I'm on my laptop, I'm cycling. So the sheer amount of calories I'm burning like 1,500 calories just in working out. The moment I'm in bed now, like that's it, I'm gone, you know? So this is another major reason why I love working out. Obviously, it's not just for feeling strong and burning calories, but just the sleep for me to feel like I'm not wasting time rolling around in bed. That's huge for me.
Grounding. I learned about grounding a couple of years or a
Mm,
year and a half ago through one of our coaches at Rivero who started doing it religiously, Becky Niles.
yeah.
And I owe her a big debt of gratitude because my quality of sleep improved dramatically once I started doing that. And that's why the whole
Yeah.
time we've been talking, I've been grounded. I got a
It's
indoor grounding device on my arm. Whenever I sit down at my desk, I make sure I put that on as long as I'm not playing guitar.
huh.
Uh, it's really had a big impact. And it's something that in my coaching um, on people how to succeed at the carnivore way of eating, I always have talk about grounding because it's a natural free way of reducing the level of inflammation in your body. And there's a great documentary called The Earthing Movie, which I highly recommend everybody go to YouTube and type that in, The Earthing Movie, into the search engine. It's an hour and 15 minutes long. It's very well made. It's very easy to understand. They don't get real sciencey and go way over people's heads. And I encourage everyone to go watch that. And if you're not convinced that you need to be doing some form of grounding at the end of it, then good for you. I think something might be wrong with you, but good for you.
It's funny. You're the second person that I've interviewed who also had the grounding stuff on him. It was Nate Clipful. His
Yep.
Instagram is Fellowship of the Nate. Do you know him?
I
Yeah.
Nate's come to my mental health meetings for the better part of the last 2 years.
Oh, okay. So you know him very well.
I
So
know him very well.
yeah,
I'm very proud of Nate. Nate is doing so beautifully these days.
yeah,
It's always great to see him and talk with him. He's a fine young man, and he's a great example for people to follow.
yeah. And eats just like you, beef, salt, water. I think that's the only thing he eats. And he told me about the sleeping easier with that. I'm gonna try and link some of those because I found them on Amazon. Do you have any specific brand that you would recommend?
Now, my wife just gets whatever's cheap and affordable. This two of these cost $15, and they were no name brand. They're just
Okay.
a no name brand. They work. I've
Wonderful.
got our house. One side of it's older than the other side. My studio room that I'm speaking to you with is on the older side. So I've actually outside my window, I've got a grounding rod pounded into the ground with a wire running in through the window
Wow.
connected to this.
Wow. And people can even get it on their mattress when they're sleeping. You can
They
get it
can.
grounded. Yeah, so there's so many different options. So I'm gonna try. I had already like looked at them and I posted them in the description box of the Nate Clipful interview. So I'm gonna repost them under here if people are interested because yeah, I think it makes sense too. Anytime we can go back and try to mimic what our DNA was exposed to for millions of years, I think we're getting closer and closer to optimal health. So
I agree. And if you stop and think about it, as a species, we did everything on the ground.
mhm,
We slept on the ground.
yeah,
If we had footwear as a species, it was animal skins, animal related footwear. It was not insular footwear like we have today.
yeah,
And so grounding was happening always.
exactly.
I've read stories about where Native American tribes, if infants became ill or whatnot, one of the common forms of treatment was to dig a small hole and lay the baby down in it and let them naked and let them touch the earth as much as they physically could. And they all got better.
Interesting. I,
Uh,
yeah,
it's another one of those ancestrally appropriate tools that has been repressed by modern stupidity and
yeah,
greed.
Yeah.
because if you can eliminate and reduce the inflammation in your body by just walking barefoot for 30 minutes a day in your backyard,
Yeah.
who makes money off of that?
No one. Exactly. Exactly. Can you share with us a day of eating?
Okay. I Number one, I follow these directions. I learned these directions from people like Kelly Hogan and Charles Washington, Dr. Lisa Wiedemann from the Zeroing In on Health group on Facebook. These people have been living this way for 10 years and longer. And those directions are as follows. Number one, only eat when you're hungry. Number two, when you're hungry, only eat meat until you're not another bite full. Number three, only eat the meat that you crave, that satisfies you, that you can afford. Number four, under no circumstance does any type of sweet taste pass your lips. And then there's the 0.5 directions that we at Meet RX Rivero kind of added on to is be patient, trust your body, trust the process. And it took me the first 6 months of carnivore to figure out what truly satisfied me. But I still lost the depression in 24 days and I lost my anxiety in 5 months. That's eating a bunch of different kinds of meat. But then in December of 2018, I discovered that lean ground beef, 90-10 or leaner, just satisfies me down to the core of my being.
Okay.
And I have been eating bacon with every meal every day because before I started this way of eating, I realized I need to learn what not to do. And one of the biggest reasons that people would fail in the beginning of the experience is because they were only eating one type of meat and it wasn't necessarily what their body was craving.
Mm-hmm.
So they would get bored.
Mm-hmm.
I could intellectually understand that. And after thinking about it, I realized bacon was never my favorite kind of meat, but there was never a meal that bacon was on the plate that I didn't enjoy. So I made a commitment to myself on day one that every meal would always have bacon in it and one other kind of meat. And I've stuck to that.
Okay.
But since December of 2018, my meals, with the exception of a handful of steaks other people have purchased for me, has been lean ground beef and bacon.
And you keep it, I guess, a little juicier by not overcooking the meat, because if it's lean, it doesn't have too much fat, or how do you do that?
I cook my meat through. I'm not one of those who likes rare meat. I
Yeah.
can't stand rare meat. If I see pink in the middle of it, throw it back on the stove
Yeah,
until
me
it's
too.
gone.
Yeah.
I hate that. You know, I watch people fix these steaks and they slice them in half and you look at it and it's like, well, geez, the cow's still talking. I mean, how are you going to eat that? It just doesn't look appetizing to me whatsoever.
Right.
That's how my
Well,
wife enjoys her steaks.
yeah, I feel like a steak, I would prefer it to be a little bit like pink in the middle, but like ground beef, I couldn't do it raw at all. It has to be fully cooked. It's funny. Yeah.
I can't even imagine doing that raw. I know there's
So,
some people who thrive eating raw meat. It works better for them, and I have no problem with that. If you enjoy eating raw meat, have a good time. Just don't expect me to join you.
and how many meals do you have per day?
When I started, I was having 4. I
Hmm.
was ravenous. I was going through almost 2.5, 3 pounds of bacon a day. And that last meal in the evening would always be nothing but bacon.
Okay.
Oh, because I knew better than to eat another 10 or 12-ounce ground beef patty along with it at 9 o'clock at night before I went to bed. That wasn't going to work out real well.
Mm.
Um, I get hungry 3 to 4 times a day now, depending upon my activity level. It's mostly 3 times a day. Once in a great while, I might only have bacon for lunch.
Right.
But pretty much every meal is lean ground beef and bacon without fail.
And you're
10
not,
ounce ground beef patties. Dinner's always a 93.7 ground beef because that's even more satisfying to me than the 90-10.
okay.
And that's usually 12 ounces,
Okay.
which gets me through the night just fine.
And no seasonings, no dairy,
I cook with salt.
coffee.
I cook with salt, beef tallow, and bacon grease only.
Okay.
I was never a coffee drinker. I used to be a prodigious tea drinker, but the light bulb went off in my head one day in 2017. You know, somebody with a history of anxiety problems like yourself, Brett, probably shouldn't be consuming any form of caffeine. And that was before I learned a couple of years ago that caffeine is a legitimate insecticide. And so I get a really childish thrill out of whenever I hear somebody say, I'm drinking coffee and that's working fine for me, except I'm not healing. You know, why is it taking me so long to get to heal when it took all you people just a few weeks to, well, what are you eating? What are you drinking? Well, I drink a cup of coffee every morning before breakfast. And I'm like, there you go.
Can be drinking.
How much healing do you think is going on while you're consuming a legitimate insecticide?
Exactly. Love it. Organs.
No.
Okay.
I do not crave them. If I don't crave it, I'm not putting it in my mouth. I'm not even going to go look at it.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, on the advice of a doctor whose advice I no longer follow, not going to mention their name.
Uh-huh.
I really tried to make myself eat liver.
Yeah.
It's a dead thing. It's not, to me, it's not even food.
Right.
It feels like when I have ground beef and bacon, even though the animal's obviously dead, it doesn't feel like I'm eating a dead thing. When I put a piece of liver in my mouth, no matter how it's cooked, it's like I have a lump of death in my mouth.
Okay.
And I think that's part of one of the things the body does when something's good for us. Oh my goodness, it tastes amazing. I mean, every bite of every meal, people are like, don't you get bored just eating that? And I'm like, listen.
Yeah.
It's the most delicious stuff I've ever put in my mouth every single time.
Did you ever get meat aversions?
Never.
Okay.
And I think the reason for that is because I started out, like I said, bacon would always be part of every meal, and there would always be another type of meat. So there's always two types of meat there on my plate.
Right. So,
and I got 4 years of pictures to prove it.
Oh, I know. You can check out Brett's Instagram at thankful.carnivore. I'm going to link all those below. Before we talk just a little bit about music, let's go through a typical day in your life. Like, how is your life structured right now?
Pardon me here. I have a deviated septum, which carnivore will not fix. And so my sinuses are always inflamed to one degree or another.
Oh.
And
you can't wait. So you can't get a rhinoplasty for a deviated septum?
Say that again.
So you cannot get a surgery, a rhinoplasty for a deviated...
I could get one if I had the money to pay for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's a minimum 8K over here.
In Jacksonville, the lowest quote I've had is 12 grand.
Really? Oh, I can send you. I already seen a doctor in Miami, but I never went through with it. And he quoted me 8K. I mean, you can get it on a credit card. There's a insurance company called Care Credit. And
yeah, I'm very familiar with Care Credit. We've had to use it before. That's how I got my dentures, was through Care Credit.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
But I'm not going in debt for. It's just something it's the one thing that carnivore can't fix that I have wrong with me, and I'm confident one day I'll be able to get that repaired, and
yeah,
it'll be nice to breathe again and not have to use nose spray on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Now, what were you asking me about before I went into that?
A typical day in your life.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I wake up at 4 a.m.
Oh, me too.
And yeah, I saw that. You're an early riser also.
Oh, yeah.
I check to see if I have a new coaching order, and then I write my daily on Facebook and on Instagram. I have a few things that I always post about. This is day whatever, and of only eating meat and drinking water. These are the benefits I've experienced. Or it's day 100, whatever, not eating sugar, plants, or carbs. And then I list all the things that sugar, plants, and carbs do that are very harmful for human beings to consume. I also have another thing that I post every Tuesday and every Friday. Fridays is fiber free Friday, about how I X number of days without consuming dietary fiber, which we have finished short, is so essential.
Yeah.
And then people, that's the most common question. I go, well, what do you do about your constipation? I'm like, I haven't had constipation for even one moment, not a moment of constipation in 1,504 days of eating this way.
Exactly.
So I make those posts. I scan my Instagram to see who asks questions and what do I need to answer immediately. Is it a life or death kind of question, or is it, something that I can answer later? And then I go cook, because I wake up ravenous. I wake up in a happy mood, starving. And I have breakfast sometime between 4:30 and 5 a.m. every day. And then after that, people who follow my Instagram will notice there's always a 8 to 9 minute blues guitar thing, and that's part of my normal practice routine. I play and record those, and then it's time to take the dog and I for a barefoot walk. We walk a mile, both of us barefoot. Not that he was going to wear shoes at all, but
so, you're walking barefoot on the grass?
No, I'm walking barefoot in the street.
On the grass, okay.
In the asphalt.
Asphalt, okay.
Which took some time to get used to at first, because I had to toughen up the bottoms of my feet. There were certain streets that were safe to walk on, and there were other streets where the asphalt was too rough. Well, now I can walk on all of them without any pain or discomfort. After that walk, it depends on whether I have a coaching session scheduled. If I don't have a coaching session scheduled, then I'm focusing on music in terms of practicing what new material I might need to hone up on for my next gig, paying job, or I'm working on something. I have a recording studio. I'm working on songs, recordings for that. Then
you have a recording studio in the house?
Right here. I'm sitting right beside the computer. I'm in the room with it. If I could show you, over there.
I'm gonna have to go visit, and we're gonna have to record.
You won't be able to see it. You won't be able to see it because of the background. I got amplifiers to the left of me, and then my studio computer's right here to my right.
Love it.
There's a big microphone.
What software do you use?
I use Logic and Studio One.
Okay.
I prefer Studio One over Logic a little bit because you can work faster in it.
Okay. I'm going to ask you more about that stuff, but I want to make sure we finish your full day of
okay.
Yeah.
Then let's see. After that, I take a few minutes I'm a video game junkie, and I always make sure I get 30 minutes of World of Warcraft in. And then usually at 10:30, I'm ready to eat again. I'm ready to start chewing through things if you don't let me have my meat and bacon. So I fixed my second meal of the day around 10:30, between 10:30 and 11. I consume that, and then I don't eat again until the dinner meal around 5:30 that evening, because that's when my wife and I are both, by 5:30, man, we're ready. We're going to eat, or we're going to be so hangry we can't stand each other.
Right.
During the afternoons, that's when I'm doing a lot of coaching stuff or music stuff. I facilitate 2 mental health meetings for the Rivera Health platform. That takes up 2 afternoons for me because I have to mentally prepare myself for that. And people don't realize the amount of energy that takes, mental energy. It's some of the most rewarding work I'll ever do in my life, as is my coaching. Then after that, it depends. If I don't have a musical commitment that evening, then I'll play a little more Warcraft. I might go outside in the yard with the dog for a while and look and see what new mushrooms have grown overnight. That kind of thing. I try to keep stress to a non-existent minimum, and I'm pretty successful at that. Then my wife comes home usually around 4:15, 4:30, and we'll visit for a little bit, and then we're not the kind of couple who has to always be in each other's face, thankfully.
Yeah.
And then at 5 o'clock we gather together, and I make the bacon and she cooks the meat patties, and we have dinner. Through dinner, we're always watching some kind of comedy special so that we laugh through our dinner instead of watching the news and getting all disturbed and all those sorts of things. Then evening time, it's usually more guitar practice. And I'm in bed. I watch maybe an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours worth of Netflix every evening with my wife, if there's something that we're both interested in watching. And, bedtime's at 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Love it. Okay. Music. So what are you working on right now?
Right now there was a lot of songs that I wrote and recorded and released that didn't get the proper treatment they deserved. When I was mentally ill, I could understand some of the concepts of mixing and mastering, but I couldn't actually use the tools to do it with. I couldn't process how to use a compressor. I couldn't process how to correctly use an equalizer. There are these simple, basic things that you have to be able to do to create a professional sounding recording. And that was why once I got back into music, before I picked up the guitar the first time, because after I lost my depression symptoms, my muse vanished. It just went away. My muse, my love for playing, it all just went away for like a year and a half.
Really? That's interesting.
It's gone. I would pick my guitar, one of my guitars up, and like, I don't even know why I still have this. I would feel nothing. But then after 2 years, I grew a new muse.
Okay.
And the need to play a guitar became overwhelming. And it still is. I mean, and it's much more positive now. Before, music was a matter of survival. Now it's all about a matter of love. And before I started focusing on getting my chops back, I spent several weeks, I should say, intensively studying the art of recording. And now I know how to use all those tools. And now I have the best tools that I can afford. And the difference in my recording quality is profound. You've heard a small bit of it.
So good.
You can hear all the instruments pretty clear, can't you?
I loved it. Wait, you never sent me the instrumental version, did you?
Not yet, I haven't.
Okay, I'm like, wait, because
I'm glad you reminded me of that, because I forgot about it. I will set that up to make that happen first thing after I get off this.
Yeah, I get so many emails, and I'm at a point where I've just given up on being in control. So I'm like, it could have come in and I haven't seen it,
No, I honest to goodness, I remember you asking me to do that.
Yeah.
And every intention of doing it, and something came up that prevented me from doing it. But by golly, as soon as we're done, I've got Studio One loading up right now as we're talking on that particular song. And I will make sure that there's an instrumental version in your email box before the end of this afternoon.
Love it. We already talked about my obsession with all of that and the music part of it. And so once I'm ready to really get into it, you're close. Melbourne is not that far from Ocala, so you could just drive down.
No, where'd you say I am?
Melbourne?
No, hon. I'm in
Oh,
Jacksonville.
Jacksonville. Sorry. I mistook you with Stephen Hartman, who I talked with him all the time. And he's in Melbourne and you're in Jacksonville. Yes. Well, still, Jacksonville is like maybe, I don't know. It's
It's
not
about
as
8-hour drive from here
no
to
from
there.
Ocala? No
I
way.
think so. I have to check. I was thinking you were further south. I was thinking you were Miami-Dade
No, no.
in
Yeah.
that area.
Yeah, if it were
Okay.
Miami, yeah, but let me see. From here to Jacksonville, it's an hour and 57 minutes. That's nothing.
From
That's
where you are to Jack.
yeah,
Oh, good grief. That's easy. That's
yeah,
easy peasy.
yeah. I'll
Well,
just
we could definitely get together and like I said, I have a studio here, uh, really good microphones,
have
etc.
a lot of
We could
fun
record you
with that.
singing, and that would be a joy
That would be so
upon
cool.
joy.
I would love it. What are
Um,
your goals? Mhm.
my goals as far as what? You need to be
Music.
a little more specific. I got
Okay, well,
lots of
you know
goals.
what? Let me not be specific. You tell me what are your goals in general in the next 5 to 10 years?
I want to be able, as a musician, to do one tour of original music. I had the privilege of seeing some extraordinarily talented people perform this spring, and as I'm watching them, it my intuition's like, there's no reason in life why you can't do that. You just have to work at it a little harder. And so I've been focused very much on improving my guitar skills, which I have been very successful. There's a billion people better than me, but I can play guitar at a very high level now. And I'm not afraid to recognize where I need to improve.
Mm.
I'm not, my ego is, it's amazing once you live this way long enough, as far as the eating as a carnivore, your ego kind of shrinks down to almost nothing. I like learning from other people. I like people pointing out, hey, instead of doing that, you should have done this. Try doing this next time. I take instruction so much better now. But I want to be doing that. I've got, I figure 3 or 4 more albums left in me to write. And I want to be able to produce the most epic music I can possibly create. On the meat side of things, see, for me, I have 2 vocations, and there's not a hair's worth of width of difference between them. One is music, and the other one is advocating this way of living. So I also would like to be invited to speak at some of these conferences, because I have a unique perspective a lot of people don't have. I can talk about mental illness from personal experience in a way that no one else can talk about, because they haven't experienced it. They haven't been mentally ill. And I think that's one of the things that's lacking. Not just with mental illness, people who've had severe, arthritis, severe whatever it was that was ailing them. I think we need more of those people need to be heard from, because those are the folks that are truly the inspiring ones. I mean, it's great. It's wonderful. Dr. Sean Baker or Brian Linskus or Dr. Tro or any of these people, Dr. Barry, they get up and they give a very good presentation.
Yeah.
And in most cases, though, it's about things they've observed and seen. They're very valid, but they haven't been curled up on that bed, holding on to a pillow, thinking, God, this anxiety is so awful. Could you just let the heart attack happen now so I don't have to suffer anymore? I've been there. I can never forget what it was like.
Wow.
And I think that that's one of the things that we need to do more of, is there needs to be more people who've had similar experiences become bigger mouthpieces for this way of eating.
Yeah.
Because that's the science part of it is so critical. It's very important, but only a small subset of people can process that.
True. True.
Whereas I could tell the story about, holding on to the pillow, wishing I would die.
Yeah.
And too many people will be like, oh man, have I been there? I know exactly what he's talking about. I want to be able to make a difference to as many people as possible by sharing my experience. And my ultimate goal with that is when everybody who needs to hear what I went through and survived has heard about it, then I can just be a musician full time and not ever have to think about it again. But those are all my ultimate goals. As far as other things, I would like to get out of Jacksonville and live in Pensacola, because this past spring, my wife and I got to we were invited and got to meet Jordan Peterson in person.
Really?
It was beautiful. I get emotional every time I remember. Because the morning I lost my depression symptoms, not 5 minutes after the switch had been flipped, I realized I needed to thank them. I needed to thank him. I need to thank Sean in person. I need to thank Amber O'Hearn in person. And I literally need to fall down and wash the feet of Michaela's, because without them, I'm dead. Or wishing I was dead. There would be no Thankful Carnivore without them. And I got to meet and thank him in private. Michaela set that up. God bless her for that. We were only with him for about 7 or 8 minutes, but it was something I'll treasure for the rest of my days.
Wow.
And I want people to understand real gratitude matters. What I've been given, what you've been given is a gift that best not be misused, lest it be taken away. And that's something else I try to let people understand. Listen, you only get so many shots at this. There's no guarantee that once you gain your sanity, if you decide to screw around and abuse your gift and eat something, for instance, I shudder to think what a teaspoonful of sugar would do to me.
Yeah.
I don't want to find out.
Yeah.
My wife has suffered enough. I certainly have suffered enough. There's no guarantee that once you lose it, that you can get it back.
Yeah.
Michaela Peterson herself talks about she tried adding some things back, and she lost her happiness for over a year because of it.
Wow.
For over, now to me, that would be the worst.
For a year? Wow. I remember her talking about eating something, and that's a whole month. She was back to the depression.
There's that one. She does an interview. It was at the very first and only carnivore convention that Amber O'Hearn put on in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, wait a minute. It's 2019. Because 2020, I was supposed to go speak at that carnivore convention, a small portion of the program, and because of the virus, it never happened. The whole convention didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
But Michaela talked to Ira Cummins. There's a video of it. I don't know. I can't remember it's probably on Ira's channel, where she talks about she lost her happiness for over a year. She said the best she could do for that year was, she said, I got some of it back. I was happy like a wolf, which didn't sound very happy at all to me. And the way she said it was kind of sarcastic. Yeah. I haven't got the chance to ask her about that. But people need to understand this is a precious gift. We need to treat it as such, and we need to share it with everyone we possibly can who needs to hear about it.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing. And thank you so much for using your platforms and coming on and doing those kinds of interviews and being on Rivero, because you are impacting far more people than I guess we'll ever know, until eventually somebody comes and tells you, and even then, we widely underestimate the impact that we're doing because we're just focused on our day to day and just helping as much as possible. We're not thinking of always the end result. So thank you so much, Brett.
You're very welcome. I do want to share one quick thing in
Yeah.
keeping with what you just said.
Yeah.
Because I deal with social media every day like you do, but I have people attacking me on a regular basis as my audience grows. I expected that. Oh yeah, I got attacked today in private by a dietitian who was mortally offended about what I was saying about eating meat and drinking water. Anyway, every time there are moments when I get frustrated with what you have to deal with, and I think about quitting. And then I can't, every time I think about that, then there was this young man, 21, 22 years old, who sent me a voice message thanking me for doing the very first interview I ever did, which was on the Carnivore Cast. He said, because I listened to you, I'd stopped wanting to kill myself. How do you give up this kind of work in the light of that? You can't.
That's why you do it. Yeah, that's why you do it. You can't, yeah. That is the most rewarding thing that you must ever feel. You're literally saving people's lives with your story and what you're doing.
And I can never stop doing this because of that.
Exactly. Well,
I'm gonna be a crotchety old man. I'm still gonna be on Instagram.
Let me tell you, eat your meat. Brett, wow. Thank you so much. I can feel your emotion, your passion, because this is real stuff. This is probably, you can think of all the chronic diseases that people struggle with. I think depression is the worst of them all, because when you have no hope and you feel like, what's it all for? I literally cannot think of any other health ailment that is worse than depression. So, again, thank you, Brett. Where can people find you?
The best place to interact with me is on Instagram at thankful.carnivore. I answer all private message questions. I get asked dozens and dozens of questions every day. I work really hard to keep my page nothing but positive. If you want to argue with me, you argue with me in private, or I'm going to block you, and I won't feel the least bit bad about it. But if you want to have a discussion, we'll do it in private. And
yeah,
I never let people ask questions that I don't answer at the soonest possible moment. I remember what it was like to be left hanging and desperate, and you're cling, what you see a light at the end of the tunnel and you're literally willing to do anything.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes to get into that light. So I don't leave people hanging at all. I do a lot of my coaching on that way as well, because there's not just the scheduled session. There's the times when people need to be checked up on, or they need to have somebody to talk them off the ledge before they put the spoonful of ice cream into their mouth that's going to bring their bipolar disorder back to them,
right?
Or prevent their multiple sclerosis from healing.
Right.
Yeah, remember, primary progressive multiple sclerosis, it's not supposed to be cured, never supposed to go into remission. But some lady that I grew up with messaged me 2 months into my carnivore journey to tell me they had primary progressive multiple sclerosis. What are you doing? Do you think it would work for me? I'm like, it won't hurt you.
Exactly.
They came back to me 6 weeks later They fired their neurologist. The neurologist had said that she would spend most of the rest of her life in a wheelchair and that it would never go into remission because it was 100% in remission. She had no symptoms after 6 weeks.
Just beef, salt, and water, I'm assuming.
Amen.
Yeah.
That works.
Yeah, I have a client right now, we're working on doing that because I feel like even the bacon, even some seasonings, I think when you have those symptoms, we can't have that flexibility. We got to go all in.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Brett, and thank you all for joining us. I hope you found this content inspirational, helpful, and share it with people who you might know are struggling with mental health. You literally could save their lives. Thank you again for watching. If you like this content, make sure you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell icon so YouTube alerts you every time I post a new video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.